Pension Review Board Principles of Retirement Plan Design Advisory Committee. I see that a quorum is present. I wonder if Ashley would please take the roll.
Keith Brainerd.
Here.
Stephanie Whitey. Here. Josh McGee.
Present.
Thank you. We're all here. Thank you all for coming, especially, and the members of the audience. Thank you for being here on a Friday afternoon. I appreciate the willingness of the members of the PRB to serve on this committee. And I'm gratified to see that members of the PRB, I think, were supportive of the idea of having these principles. You know, we tend to take for granted that we've got these certain kinds of retirement plans in the state. We are the Pension Review Board. But I think that we need to be careful not to take for granted that we've got the kind of retirement plans that are prevailing in the state for public employees. And so partly for that reason, we thought that it would be prudent for the Pension Review Board to articulate our view of what is a good retirement plan, why we have retirement plans, what role they play with regard to public employment in the state and for its political subdivisions. And given that these retirement plans do play a role in the state's ability to attract and retain workers, we, the Pension Review Board, ought to take a position with regard to what form these retirement benefits ought to take. And so that's why we're here today. The members of the committee, and I think was also as provided in the back of the room, have access to some material that we prepared, and specifically we should have, in addition to our agenda, Resolution 2016-01, Guiding Principles for Public Retirement Plan Design and Sustainability. This is a resolution. It is of the National Association of State Retirement Administrators, which is my employer, and this is an articulation, as the title implies, of what NASRA, whose members are the directors of statewide retirement systems around the United States, believes should guide retirement plan design for employees of state and local government. And I sent that to the staff and to share with this group as a sample or a guideline of the elements of retirement plan design that we might consider. In addition, I prepared this document titled Principles of Retirement Plan Design that tried to just list the basic elements of retirement plan design that I'm hoping will serve as the basis of our conversation today. In addition, I identified plan types. It's not my intention, I can't speak for the committee, but it is not my intention that retirement plan design guidelines of the Pension Review Board would specify plan type. I don't think that that's our role, but rather what I wanted to do was create a contrast and try to articulate, try to distinguish what should and should not go into the principles of retirement plan design. So speaking just for myself, it's not my intention that we would incorporate plan type, that is defined benefit or cash balance or defined contribution, into the retirement guidelines as proposed by the Pension Review Board, but rather try to provide a sort of a perspective and clarification of what will end up in our ultimate retirement guidelines. And so with all of that as prologue, what I'd like to do is just throw it out and see what kind of thoughts the members of the committee have with regard to how we might go about crafting some guidelines.
Yeah, I appreciate, Keith, you putting this together. It's very helpful and kind of works as a great straw man. The only thing I'll add is, so I don't know if I have a great way for us to go about doing this other than it would be great just to kind of talk through how we categorize the major elements of perhaps principles on the plan type. I totally agree with your approach on that, and it might be useful, as I think you've mentioned before, to have a description of the different plan types, and at some later point we could also talk about kind of how the principles would apply to the key plan types. so that we make sure we kind of define what a good design looks like for the different major plan types that exist. I would add, I kind of share your worry. We've seen a lot across the country of policymakers making a lot of changes to retirement plans, and often they get in and they pull this lever and they pull that lever, and you end up with a Frankenstein system. What I've seen in a lot of places is it's all about cost cutting. And not enough about fixing the funding sufficiency. And because of that, often they end up with a bad benefit for new employees and no funding commitment, which is kind of the worst of both worlds. And so I think kind of putting a marker out to say, here's what funding sufficiency looks like, I think here's what benefit sufficiency looks like is a great thing to think about.
So, on the document titled Principles of Retirement Plan Design, under Elements and Considerations of Plan Design, I've tried to list the different elements or factors that would comprise or constitute a retirement plan design guideline document. And maybe we could just walk through that and get a sense for the way this might work and what members of the committee are thinking. And so with regard to participation, different requirements or modes of participating in a retirement plan. You've got mandatory, where employees have no choice. Obviously optional, where employees presumably do have a choice. Revocable, where an employee can choose to get out once they've chosen to get in, or been placed in whether they liked it or not. Irrevocable, default participation, and so on. And as a point of reference, the NASRA guidelines call for mandatory participation. And as it indicates, nearly all state and local governments require participation in the retirement program as a condition of employment. In my view, speaking for myself, I think that for employees of state and local government, certainly for permanent employees, that is non-seasonal employees, that participation in a retirement benefit should be mandatory, that employees should be required to participate in a retirement benefit.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I don't know that I think that mandatory participation is for full-time employees, I think, is a pretty easy one to land on. And I don't know how you want. Maybe there's some nuance around how you define full-time employee. Maybe you want to have some description around part-time. You said seasonal. We could talk about maybe there's some nuance around that, but I think I would have strong agreement with mandatory.
Okay. Well, for me, the issue of full-time is, or potentially non-mandatory, pertains more to seasonal employees. That is, someone who's not necessarily permanently with the employer. I think that both full-time and part-time workers, in my view, should be required to participate in the retirement plan, or at least that our guidelines should call for mandatory participation of all permanent, should we call it permanent employees.
Yeah, we'll have to land on the right word.
and we may not need to be so specific. We can just say participation is mandatory.
Yeah, I would be comfortable with that.
Another important feature of retirement plan design includes contributions. Who contributes, when, and how much. I don't know that we necessarily need to get too specific. For me, what would suffice would be something along the lines of that contributions should be, the cost of financing the plan should be shared by employees and employers, which is the prevailing model in the public sector already.
Yeah, I don't know that I have, personally, I don't know that I have strong opinions about whether the cost necessarily should be shared. I think that is kind of part of the negotiation that happens between the employee and employer. Here, my question is more about levels. Do we want to specify adequate savings rates or accrual rates, and do so for participants with and without Social Security? So one model could be to say that if for participants in Social Security, you should have an accrual rate, we could call it accrual rate so that it covers kind of all plan designs, that is equivalent to saving 10 to 12% of payroll per year, and that will get you basically to where you need to be in terms of replacement at retirement age, wherever that is. If you don't have Social Security, you need to save, I generally say 18 to 20% of payroll. I mean, we could talk about those numbers, but I think the concept of saying, here is generally what people should be setting aside as a percentage of payroll on an annual basis to reach a secure retirement by retirement age. Kind of setting general guidelines around that. And maybe we have a language that's not super firm around that, but I think that would be an interesting concept.
Thank you for that. I would point out that one of the following or ensuing elements is benefit levels, and we might consider addressing that which you just described under benefit levels as opposed to contributions. We might approach contributions more in a generic sense, that is, at a higher level, to say that just as a matter of principle, both employees and employers ought to share in the cost of financing their retirement benefit.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting concept. I don't know if Stephanie has any thoughts on that. I don't know. I just don't have a strong opinion about whether they should necessarily share. So, for example, if an employer wanted to offer an employee a defined benefit plan and it was all employer pay, I don't know that I would necessarily be concerned about that, as long as the employer contributed the full cost.
Okay.
I mean, we could talk about, I just don't know if I would be that concerned about that situation.
But do you really think, I guess today, that you have that many plans that are all employer? Not only has there been a shift away, either from defined benefit plans, but I think, the plans that are out there that are all employer paid have been having a lot of movement towards employee contributions, so that frankly, I don't know how many are there, or if there are any even in the state right now of solely employer.
Yeah, I don't know of any in Texas.
Yeah, but I think that's fine, and I just don't know that, as a matter of principle, that I think sharing is an important element of benefit design. Now, I think you could argue that if cost is shared, then both parties are really invested in making sure that the plan works. So I guess that could be an argument, but I don't know as a matter of principle that I care that much. I think as a matter of practice, employers are facing budgetary constraints, and so one way to get some more money is to make the employees pay more and they can pay less. So that's, for me, is more about budgetary. That's a budgetary concern for the employer, but I don't know if a matter of principle that I care that much who pays for it.
Okay. Why don't we come back to contributions? We don't have a consensus on that one, and that's fine.
On contributions, one other thing that we might want to discuss is actually paying for your promises.
Adequacy.
And then we could point to our funding, or what do we call them now, guidelines for pension funding. So regardless of what plan design you have, what plan type it is, you got to pay for your promises. For defined benefit plans, see our guidelines.
Yeah, something along the lines, perhaps, that contributions should be consistent with the PRB funding guidelines.
I like that a lot.
Asset management, choices as presented here: pooled, professionally invested, individual accounts, self-directed. Josh, I think you had some comments on those.
Yeah, I just added, do we want to say anything about asset allocation, so something like appropriately diversified or risk? So I don't know what we would say on risk, but those are two other issues that we might want to think about.
Is there agreement that, as a matter of principle, retirement benefits for employees of state and local government should have their assets pooled and professionally invested?
I would agree with that. I would say pooled, professionally invested, and I might even add in, I didn't put it on my comments earlier, but low fee or something around fees might be useful to signal that, we need fees to come down. I often say pooled, professionally managed, low fee, and appropriately diversified or something like that.
How about something along the lines of invested in a manner that minimizes cost?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we can work out the language.
I would love to have a threshold there. Investment fees should be no more than 100 basis points.
But that would be too prescriptive, don't you think, for principles?
I like prescriptive.
So do we have consensus on the group that individual accounts and self-directed are not optimal for the primary retirement benefit for public employees?
No, I disagree with that.
Okay. What part do you disagree with?
So I can envision a well-designed cash balance plan where you've got notional accounts. Now, does that count as individual accounts or not? We've got two of the oldest, biggest, and well-managed cash balance plans in the country. I think that they're well-funded. So I just don't think we don't necessarily care if they're, I think you're wrapping some stuff into individual account that is not super helpful. And on self-directed, I think also if we look at public plans across the country, there are what counts as self-direction. I think that there are situations where people have choice amongst plans. Is that self-direction? I think there are choices within plans, within different types of plans. Is that self-direction? You're talking about the investments, I think. But there are even situations where we've got well-designed defined contribution plans where there's a limited set of well-designed, professionally managed, pooled, low-fee investment options, and they've got a choice between two or three. So I think I don't want employees in their primary account to be able to day trade Russian currency, but I get the sentiment, but I think that here some limitation on self-direction is right. But I don't know. I think we capture that in pooled, professionally managed, low fee.
Okay. Okay. To that point, what if we stuck with regard to asset management, pooled, which I think we agree on, professionally invested, and some sentiment indicating low cost?
Yep.
We don't necessarily have to address the individual accounts and self-directed.
Yeah, I think that's right. We could say. I would even be comfortable with like a limited set of pooled, professionally managed. Indicating some limit on the choice. I would be fine with that. I don't know that it's additive. On pooled, I take pooled to mean that that we aren't allowing people to buy individual stocks. Is what I view as pooled. I just want to make sure that we're in agreement on what pooled means. I would count, let's say, just to pull an example out of the air, like Colorado Para runs a defined contribution plan where they have target date funds that they have constructed. Now, those are pooled investments that are low fee, professionally managed, that fit all of this. So I view that as fitting this.
I don't. And maybe we should take a step back. In my view, these elements of retirement, principles of retirement plan design, should apply. The context we're talking about here is retirement benefits for retirement plans that are the primary retirement benefit. And in the case of Colorado, I think those are supplemental.
No. It's the primary. There are certain classes of employees who can't participate in that plan.
Are you talking about the Colorado Para or Fire and Police?
The para. Higher education employees and state employees can choose to participate in their.
Okay.
And is generous on the contribution rates, compensates people for the risk, and takes all of the management off the table. They've got a selection of para investments that they can choose from.
Okay.
There's another example. Oregon and Washington have defined contribution plans that the only investment option is to invest in the pension plan itself. So there's nothing. It just goes directly there.
Well, a couple thoughts. Those are elements of hybrid plans. In the case of Oregon, that's the defined contribution component of the primary retirement benefit. And for what it's worth, they're just in the process right now of switching from the pooled accounts into target date funds in Oregon.
To give a little more choice.
Yeah.
Yep.
But they've still got the core pension component, which features pooled assets that are professionally invested. And basically the same concept in Washington, where they've still got the pension benefit, which is the core component of the benefit, supplemented by a defined contribution account, where employees have roughly a dozen choices that includes investing in the big pooled account. And so, in my view, the focus of our guidelines should be on the core retirement benefit, which is something akin to a pension or a traditional defined benefit plan. In other words, in my view, public employees, as a matter of principle, sound retirement plan design does not feature employees managing their own retirement assets.
I would agree with that to a point. I think that we don't want people to be responsible for individually choosing amongst a huge set of investments where they have no ability to navigate. I am not concerned really at all about a limited set of well-designed, like target date funds that where the default is to place people in one of those funds, and it's kind of a easy button type option. And as long as, and we can talk later on down here, but you could apply principles of pooled. I would think that, like the Colorado example, that for me fits pooled, professionally managed, low fee. We could talk about annuitization later on. We could also talk about kind of how much risk protection is right on the longevity side and the investment side. But I think there are core elements that should apply across plan design instead of getting into the core design should be this type of plan.
Okay, so we have consensus on pooled, I think.
As long as we mean pooled is just a vehicle where it's not you pick an individual stock. I totally agree with that. There's a vehicle where you get a choice and the assets are pooled to get into a diversified investment vehicle, and that is professionally managed.
Okay. And some sentiment relating to low cost as well.
Yep.
So for the moment, can we leave asset management at pooled, professionally invested, and low cost?
Do we want to say anything about diversified? Do we want to say anything about allocation? Or is that just something, do we want to give a head nod to make sure that we don't end up in a situation where a plan puts 50% of the assets in real estate, or so does kind of the Dallas police and fire thing? Do we want to say it's important that there is diversification?
Yeah, I think that adding a sentiment of diversification is prudent.
Well diversified or appropriately diversified or whatever the case is.
We could even go a step further and say consistent with investment principles of what's the terminology? Consistent with investment principles of
modern portfolio theory.
Either modern portfolio theory or a prudent person standard.
Yeah.
Diversified assets invested in a manner consistent with the prudent person standard. or prudent person standards,
Is
because
that-
there are multiple standards out there.
Is that too wonky?
I don't think so.
We're
Because
pretty wonky.
frankly, prudent person standard, I think that we've had a recent example right here in the state of Texas in which one could argue that they were not following prudent person standards.
Yeah, I'll have to get more detail, but I'm okay with that.
Instead of us just plowing through all of this, why don't we stop for a moment and see if anybody in the audience would like to share comments on what we've discussed to date so far? Anybody want to weigh in? We've touched so far on participation, and we have, I think we've reached a consensus that participation in an employer-sponsored retirement plan for employees of state and local government should be mandatory, that contributions should be made, bear with me just a moment. We suggested there be a reference, which should be made in a manner consistent with PRB funding guidelines, and that assets for the primary retirement benefits should be pooled, professionally invested in low-cost investments, diversified portfolios consistent with the some prudent person standard. If you want to make comments, would you please come to the front and introduce yourself, please?
Thank you. I'm Lois Emerson with CPS Energy in San Antonio, and it's just a question on the pooled. I'm not sure that I understand that. We're a defined benefit plan. We hire investment managers. We have separately managed accounts. We have some commingled pooled accounts. I'm not real clear what that means.
Your assets are pooled. The assets are of all of the contributions from the employer and employees are put into a common account.
Okay.
Or a pooled
So rather
account.
than having individual accounts for each.
Or a set of common account, right, or a set of common investment vehicles, right? So I take pooled to mean that it's not that individuals are choosing stocks. So it's that they are investing in a vehicle that has a lot of other people's money in it.
So if we have an administrative committee that is, a group of people who are making investment decisions, hiring investment managers for the pool of money, that's what you're talking about?
Yes, that would be
Okay.
pooled.
Exactly right.
Okay. Thank
And
you.
a target date fund kind of thing would fit that. Or yours is kind of pooled and you've got investment managers. It's the same concept.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else care to comment on what we've done so far? Yes, ma'am. Please come to the podium.
Got to get you on the record.
Right. It's just a quick question. It was about the contributions. Julie Higgins from Houston Fire. The contributions, there was a problem or a question about employees contributing versus, the employer and the employee. I think that if the employee doesn't contribute, my concern is there won't be enough of a benefit to pay out retiree income.
Yeah,
If we just leave it up to the employer. And we really, right now we pay a certain percent, and together it actually brings up the total.
Well, I agree. On a national basis, employee contributions account for 12-15% of all of the money that flows into these public pension funds. That's less than the employers contribute. That's less than the investment earnings generate. But it is, anyone who runs a pension fund will tell you that those employee contributions are vital to making the monthly payroll and financing the long-term cost of the plan. And I cannot speak for him, but I think what Mr. McGee is saying is that that's sort of a how, and if an employer wants to set up an arrangement in which the employer makes all of the contributions, in his view, the larger, more important point is that contributions be adequate to fund the benefits that are being promised.
I understand. I hope that the benefits being promised are competitive and that the employer can pay that, because my view is that I don't know that that's really, especially with the government entity, or we're talking about the state of Texas. If say an individual doesn't pay into their pension, where else do you invest it? Because this is a retirement this is your retirement savings.
Yeah, I think we're going to deal with benefit adequacy a little later down on the list. I think this is one of many principles, and benefit level is something we're going to deal with later on. I don't know as a matter of principle that we care where the money comes from. We care that there is enough money that provides an adequate benefit.
Well, I care. And I don't want to get caught up on I don't want to get caught up on disagreements at this point in the process, but ultimately I'm hoping to be able to persuade a majority of this committee and or the Pension Review Board that as a matter of principle, it's sound retirement policy for employees to have some skin in the game. That is to be contributing toward the cost of their benefit. In addition to the financing purpose for that, I think that the psychological idea of employees feeling as if they've got ownership in their retirement benefit is helped when they are helping to pay the cost of that benefit.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable point.
Right. Thank you.
Thanks very much for your comments. Anyone else before we move on to other elements of retirement plan design? Yes, sir. Please introduce yourself.
David Stacy, Midland Fireman's Relief and Retirement Fund. And I would have to agree strongly that employee contributions are a critical component of sound plan design. And the easiest example to pick on is the state of Illinois. And Chicago, and where the plans that are the most upside down have no employee contributions. They require, or they depend entirely upon employer contributions. And so, for the very point that employees don't have skin in the game, or are not perceived to have skin in the game, then the employee can, or the employer can then go, well, they're not putting anything anyway, so we can promise the world, and then we may or may not get around to paying for it. I think it is not only psychologically, it is sound governance to have employees a functional, integral component of the funding mechanism of any plan, regardless of plan design or plan type. I mean, I think there is more argument to say that is a logical, well thought out, sound principle than there is to say that it doesn't matter where it comes from, because it does matter. It matters very much. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. One point of clarification, though. Illinois, I'm not familiar with every plan in Illinois. The teacher's plan, employees contribute 9%. Now there are pickups of that from employers, but that's a substantial amount. In fact, Tier 2, Illinois is an example where it's employers and the state who have been almost militant about not making their contribution, and that's the real problem. Employees have kicked in what they were asked.
Well, there are some plans. Illinois has several plans, large municipal plans, small municipal plans, and state plans, funded in a variety of different mechanisms. But there are several plans in Illinois which are exclusively employer funded, and there are no employee contributions made. And the danger of that is that over time it has allowed the employer to not make the committed contributions on time, over time, and make the fund now unsound, and the employers are left on the hook. They've been promised a benefit, and lo and behold, the taxpayers throw a fit because, oh no, we can't pay this now. Whereas, and it's viewed from a perception standpoint, well, it's taxpayer money anyway. It's not a promised benefit. It's not an obligation that the taxpayers promised. I think there is much more basis for ownership on all parties. If there is an employee contribution made, then that appropriately provides a degree of ownership that this is an obligation on both parties' part to provide a benefit at a future date that is a promised benefit we're going to follow through with.
Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate your comments. Did you have any other comments on that issue?
Thank you.
Let me reflect on that through the prism, perhaps, of corporate pension plans. And corporate pension plans do not allow employee contributions. And the conventional wisdom is, and I'm not a corporate...
Corporate defined benefit plans.
Right.
Yep.
And I'm not an expert in corporate defined benefit plans, but the conventional wisdom is that they do not allow or require employee contributions as a matter of employer control, because it allows the employers to completely control the plan. And I think that the speaker makes a strong point that requiring employee contributions or allowing employee contributions lets their skin in the game and gives them a sense of ownership in the plan. So I am hoping that ultimately the principles of retirement plan design adopted by the Pension Review Board will reflect that it's sound retirement policy for employees to be contributing to the cost of their retirement benefit.
Can I add one thing
Please.
on that? I think the skin of the game argument, this ownership argument, could be compelling. I'm not quite there yet, but it could be compelling. I will just say that Mr. Stacy and I totally share the same aims. So Illinois governments just haven't paid their pension contributions. I don't know that it has anything to do with employee contributions. Like, by and large, they just haven't. It's a cultural thing in Illinois that they didn't pay their contributions. That's a problem. But I think we need to get over that. And so we share the same aims on that. But I'm close to convinced on the skin in the game, dual ownership. I think we need more people invested in the health of the retirement plans and the management of those plans than we have today. More transparency, more involvement, more scrutiny.
Okay. We appreciate your open-mindedness on that issue.
Only on that one, though.
The issue of treatment of investment gains and losses, and I'm not sure that that's something that needs to be specifically articulated in these in retirement plan principles, but it is an element of a retirement plan design, and I'll just open it up to see if the committee has any comments on that.
Whenever you say treatment of investment gains and losses, you're saying essentially risk sharing on the investment side. Who bears the risk?
Yeah, that's a good bottom line summation of that. Benefit types: retirement, disability, death, health care. I think, Josh, in the days leading up to this, you had suggested that we should strike consideration of health care, which I agree with. We're really talking about retirement plans. Death benefits. Disability, I'm not so sure that we should strike those others. Disability and death benefits typically, usually in the public sector, accompany retirement benefits as a way of administering these benefits and financing these benefits. It's a very efficient way to do it, to provide these benefits, that is death and disability, along with the retirement benefit. And typically, a public retirement plan will include some element of disability and death coverage to accompany the retirement benefit. And I think that principles of retirement plan design could include, at a minimum, a mention of the provision of death and disability benefits.
Yeah, I don't know that I strongly disagree with that at all. I think that it's a little bit different in that the retirement benefit side is a savings vehicle and disbursement vehicle, and then you've got pure insurance products. So they're a little bit different, and you're right that for efficiency they've been commingled in a lot of places because it's easier to have a state entity that provides all of those products together. And I think death and disability, healthcare, they're all important. So my point on this was we're talking about retirement plan design and not necessarily death and disability or health insurance plan design. And I don't know that I'm somewhat agnostic as to whether those are within the retirement plan or offered in some other way, as long as they're adequate. But I would be open to some statement on appropriate provision of death and disability benefits or something like that?
Well, from my standpoint, one of the important factors with regard to death and disability is that they often spill over or overlap with regard to retirement benefits. What do you do with the police officer who's been there a year and then is killed in the line of duty? You don't want to just give his spouse his contributions back with perhaps some nominal rate of interest. So it really goes beyond retirement. Although the primary purpose for the fund and the benefit is retirement, not everybody makes it to retirement. Life happens, death sometimes happens, disability happens, and it's a very efficient and economical way to provide these benefits. And in some cases, it's also a very humane way, an appropriate way as a matter of public policy to address these. Because in the absence of these, then the state and its cities and the other political subdivisions are left with trying to come up with an insurance product separate and apart from the retirement plan. So I think there are sound reasons for providing these sort of accompanying or sidecar benefits along with retirement, namely disability and death, and that as a matter of retirement plan design, we should consider including at least a mention of death and disability benefits to accompany the retirement benefit.
Yeah, I would be open to that. I would just say that like I said, these are sidecar benefits. The contribution, the normal cost, the cost of the death and disability is built in. There are some plans in the country that actually separate that cost out and say, here's what we're paying for the retirement benefit, here's what we're paying for death and disability, here's what we're paying for health care. But I agree that the state needs some vehicle for doing this. You could purchase death and disability on the open market. I don't know that would be the right way to do it. I don't know that I care if it's done that way or not, as long as, again, there's benefit adequacy. But I think we can make a statement about adequate death and disability benefits as part of retirement planning. I'd be comfortable with that.
Thank you.
The healthcare is an interesting one, and I don't know what we want to say on healthcare. As you know, OPEB promises are almost completely unfunded across the country. Now, people are getting switched on to this and starting to pre-fund some of their OPEB promises. Too many governments have viewed those promises as fungible, and so we'll deal with that when we get down the road. I don't know what we want to say on healthcare, but I'll acknowledge that that's a big issue facing our plans because, again, this is a benefit that's rolled in and facing the government sponsors. So I don't know if we want to say, I think as a matter of course, we should say that death and disability should be provided to especially public safety employees, and that should be adequate. I don't know what we want to say about health care. Here, in terms of benefit, you've got benefit types. This is the types of benefits that should be provided. I don't know what we want to say.
Well, for me, health care is a horse of a different color. It's a completely different ball of wax. It's a darn near an impossible nut to crack in terms of adequate public policy, and I think that we should not try to address health care as part of this.
That.
Next item or element in our list is benefit eligibility, age, years of service, vesting. Those are details that I don't think necessarily belong in a statement of principles of retirement plan design, but we might address them in the concept of maybe an overarching or general statement with regard to the retirement benefit serving as an important human resources management tool of an employer. And that would be in broader language that does not specify benefit eligibility. That is to say that a preamble to the retirement elements of retirement plan design could say something along the lines of an acknowledgement, that is, contain an acknowledgement that a retirement plan is an important human resources management tool for employers.
Could we say it a little bit differently? So I would like to. Human resources is just kind of a wonky term, I would, if the point is it can be used to manage your workforce, I would disagree with that. It's a pretty blunt force instrument in the way it's being used right now. But I think we could unpack it and say it's an important part of an employee's compensation and is important to their well-being in retirement. So, I mean, I think you can make the compensation is an important part of compensation and make the retirement security point. The two reasons we provide these things is because we want to compensate employees and they value retirement benefits. So we want to do that. The other reason is we want people to reach a secure retirement. And so we could say those two things explicitly in the preamble, and I'd be totally comfortable with that.
Okay, that's great. Is staff getting, is it y'all trying to keep up?
We're not going to remember any of this, so.
Okay, on to the issue of benefit
Oh,
levels.
can I add
Yeah,
one more
please.
thing? Do we want to say something about vesting? I think vesting is an important thing that we might, it's an important thing that we might want to say something about in that a lot of plans in the country have moved to very long period vesting for new employees. So if you look at teachers' plans, some, more than half of states have 10-year vesting. My concern with that is if we care about retirement security, we are putting a whole lot of people, if you think about somebody's career, 30, 40-year career, we are essentially removing employer contributions fully from that equation for the first third or first quarter of somebody's career, placing them at a huge retirement savings deficit. So I'm concerned that an easy fix to some of the budgetary difficulties is to really push out the vesting periods, and that feels justified, but we're putting some of those workers at a very big deficit for a big portion of their careers. So can we say something about should not exceed a certain number of years, or can we say something about vesting?
I agree completely, and I think that the principle should reference perhaps immediate or a short vesting period.
Would you be comfortable with 5 years or fewer, or would you rather just say short period, immediate, or short period?
Yeah, I think we should avoid being too prescriptive, so immediate or a short period.
I'm down with that. For the record, ERISA is 5 years or fewer.
Also, for the record, 2 or 3 states in the last few years have increased their vesting period to 10 years and have come back and realized that it only impaired their ability to attract and retain workers. And the savings were nebulous if they existed at all, and have pared back their vesting period back to 3 or 5 years.
Yep. Yeah, I would like to push people not to go there. I like that.
Benefit levels, income replacement rate, amount. What do we wish to say with regard to benefit levels of a retirement plan as a matter of principle?
I would be interested in saying something around this. Now, the difficulty is a little bit of a moving target. I don't know what your opinion is. It would be great to hear that. I think we could say something about kind of general target replacement, but again, it'd have to be a pretty substantial range. We would have to think about Social Security versus not Social Security. So I don't know how you want to do that. You could say together with Social Security retirement benefits, we should target a replacement rate of between 65 and 80% of end of career pay or something like that. I don't know exactly how you want to say that.
I have a suggestion.
I figured you would. You have it drafted there in front of you.
How about the benefits should be designed to replace a designated portion of employee's salary based on selected periods of service in consideration of the presence or absence of Social Security. So, and what that is saying is that the employer, when they're designing the retirement plan, should consider the outcome. That is, as opposed to, for example, a defined contribution plan, which can result in anything. A retirement plan should be designed to purposefully or intentionally replace a certain amount of income. Whether or not it does, of course, will vary, but we're talking about the process of designing the plan, the intention behind it.
I would agree with that, although I would disagree with your comment on defined contributions, as you wouldn't be surprised.
Okay, I'll rescind that part.
The only thing I would have, I would like to wordsmith in that a little bit is for selected years of service. I think that whenever I say it's a little bit of a moving target, you kind of took out the range, which is fine. I think that, the concept of when people should retire, that's also a moving target. And it's I would love for that to be more flexible with the individual as well. And so I think maybe taking out the selected years of service and putting in something like retirement age or help people. It should strive to have a targeted replacement rate at the place them on the path to the targeted replacement rate at a specified retirement age or something, or some designated retirement age, whatever the case may be. And I think that element of path is also important because we want to, in terms of benefit levels, it's a bad design if we say, okay, I'm going to give you a retirement benefit. It will provide you 80% replacement after a 35-year career, but you're not going to earn any of it until you get to that 35th year, right? So there's an element here that people need adequate savings all along the point of time because life happens. And sometimes you have to move, sometimes you change careers, and we don't want to put people behind the 8 ball until they reach that designated retirement age. So maybe something like puts people on the path to a targeted replacement rate at retirement age or something like that. But I very strongly agree with the sentiment that we should be thinking about adequacy, and replacement rate is a good way to think about that.
Okay. Well, the dais is never a good place to wordsmith, but I think we've got the concept out there, and we can work on the specific language later on. Anu, how are we doing?
Doing fine. I think we've made a lot of progress. We would appreciate, or staff would appreciate, though, if at the end you could summarize the agreements so we can make sure we got all of them.
We might have to have Michelle, who is taking. Oh, darn. I think we can do that. We can do that.
Hopefully we can do that without having to rehash it all.
I mean, that's up to you.
Let me stop here and see if anybody in the public wishes to weigh in on what we're doing so far. Please come to the podium and introduce yourself. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Eloise Raphael. I'm with the Houston Firefighters Relief and Retirement Fund, and it's good that you mentioned adequacy, but also income replacement and what's adequate is relative. And you also mentioned something to the effect of perhaps Social Security without Social Security with Social Security. That also is relative because depending on if you're public safety, you may go on further to receive your required quotas within your governed by federal regulations that would further reduce the amount that you would potentially, or whatever is shown on your statement. So I believe that adequacy is a good path, but as individual as we are, that concept is, again, relative. So it'll be very hard for you to define what that is for each individual.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I wonder if, and we don't have to hash this out in detail now, but I wonder if ultimately we might wish to distinguish in the principles between career workers and shorter-term workers. And I suspect that we would get consensus that a career worker should replace a designated portion, and perhaps in that case we could be more specific about a portion of salary that should be replaced for someone who spends 25 to 35 years with their employer, which many public sector jobs do, particularly public safety personnel and school teachers. And that is very distinct from people who come to work for the state or its cities and counties who stay for 5 or 10 years. We could have a different statement for those. Just something to think about.
Yeah, I think I more agree with the direction you were going before, which is to have people think about adequacy and a target replacement rate and putting people on the path to reaching that, and being more saying here you should think about putting people on the path to a target replacement rate, but leave that more up to the individual context to define what that rate is and when they should reach it. I would rather go there than trying to define it. I mean, I get that, like, we understand that state workers generally have shorter careers than public safety in a particular jurisdiction. However, even within those groups, we don't know who the full career people are versus the mid-career people. It's just, you can't necessarily predict that at the outset. So I would like to make sure that we just say that we want to help all people be on the path to get there. And so it's more agnostic as to career length, or just because that's something that even individuals don't necessarily know going in. We want everybody to reach retirement security.
Yeah, but some people get there. A firefighter who works for, say, 25 years, in my view, has gotten there. Same with, say, a police officer. A school teacher who works for, say, 30 years, in my view, has gotten there. And that's all we should ask of those people, is to work a designated years of service in certain professions. And we ought to acknowledge that. And so if a firefighter works 25 years and the retirement plan prescribes that 25 years of service, and you can retire with a multiplier of, say, 2.5, and you get a retirement benefit equal to 50% of your final.
Is it also
final pay.
Dangerous to do math on the dais?
Yes, definitely, especially from your head. But I think that it's okay to acknowledge that, yes, many employees we want to put on a path, but other employees we want to acknowledge that they have arrived.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all, and I don't know that we're actually disagreeing. I think that you got to be on the path to get there. I think that's an important thing to say, and I think that we shouldn't forget about those mid-career. So you talk about teachers. Teachers move between states, they move between districts, they do a lot of that, and they get harmed in their retirement security because of that. So your 30-year teacher gets a huge reduction if they switch states midstream. And I don't know that we need to get into that at all. I think we just need to kind of signal that if you're an employer, or you're a policymaker and you're setting up a retirement benefit plan, that you need to consider the type of workers that you have. You need to help all of them save for a secure retirement, and you need to have a goal in mind. You need to have the arrival point in mind that you're trying to hit. Set that up. So I like where you were initially with that, and saying that here's kind of where you're trying to go.
Okay. Thank you. Access to retirement assets, when, under what circumstances, how much, lump sum, annuitized, periodic time certain, liquidity, and loans. Why don't we take this in bites? And one element, in my view, should be that a principle of retirement plan design for employees of state and local government should include annuitization. That the central feature of the payment of that benefit should be annuitized. That is a benefit that cannot be outlived, that will last the rest of the employee's life.
Are you covering this, so post-retirement? Okay, so this is where we're covering annuitization. I totally agree with that. Access to annuities is important. I think we should say something about low-fee annuities, something around maybe cost on that, or low-cost annuities, similar to what we did on investments. But I agree with that. I think I don't know that we should imply that the entire benefit should be provided as annuity, but I think access to annuities, even default annuitization of a huge share of that, is important. So, especially for those not in Social Security.
Okay. I want to go beyond access to annuities, because any garden variety 401k plan can say it provides access to an annuity.
There's a garden variety?
Vanilla. But I also agree that the entire thing does not have to be annuitized. Yeah. And I would point out, for example, the Texas Municipal Retirement System, which allows employees to take a portion of their retirement benefit as a lump sum, mm-hmm. and then to annuitize the remainder, which I think is a great plan design. I think that that mandatory annuitization of a portion of the benefit should be included as a central feature.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't know that we need to get into the proportion. We could put an adjective before it. I mean, a substantial portion. We could say something like that, because I think that lump sums are good in that, for a variety of reasons, an individual might want to consume more early in retirement. They may want to buy an RV and go hang out with grandkids. They may want to do a bunch of stuff, and they may be, but you still want that lifetime income, that longevity protection, to be there for them. And you may not, in a lot of systems, you are not harming that by allowing them to take a partial lump sum and use that retirement savings in the way they see fit.
Yeah, some people want to pay off the house or other loans or whatever, and it promotes retirement security.
Buy a Harley.
Okay, we can hammer out the language later on. We might wish to consider language as a principle of retirement plan design that either discourages or minimizes or restricts access to loans, lump sum, anything that represents leakage of retirement assets pre-retirement.
I'd be fine with that as long as there was a statement that gave an exception to extreme hardship. The only problem I have with this is we should not hold up retirement as being something that is above and beyond any other life circumstances. So you could imagine a situation where I've got retirement savings, I'm mid-career, something happens, and I am out of work, or something happens in my life where I have an emergency where I need cash, and I've got high school kids, and it seems to me that we shouldn't say that, oh no, your retirement's more important than you having access to that money today. So as long as we have some carve out for exceptional circumstances, I think I'm fine with that.
We don't have to agree on it here, but I would argue that as a national policy, we are far too permissive to providing access to retirement benefits. There's far too much leakage pre-retirement, and these are tax exempt vehicles for a reason, and I think it's entirely appropriate public policy to say that we're going to give you this tax exemption in order that these dollars be used in retirement. And in the absence of very severe individual circumstances, they should be used for that intended purpose and not as an ATM.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that.
Post-retirement benefit adjustments, which is sort of a $10 way of saying a cost of living adjustment. None, automatic, linked to some external factor. We might wish to say that a principle of retirement plan design should include a hedge against inflation, and that hedge should be funded in advance.
I agree with the general concepts that you laid out. I don't know about the wording.
How would you word it?
Yeah. I mean, I think that what you want to say is COLAs should be linked to actual inflation, should be designed as they should be real inflation protection. So they should be linked to inflation and should be pre-funded. So I agree with both sentiments.
Okay.
We don't want the Illinois 3% annual compound no matter what, and we don't want the Kentucky where they just gave a COLA every year and it increased their unfunded liability because they didn't pre-fund. I agree with those. Does that, on that language, sorry to interrupt, on that language, I mean, the way we had talked about it, I don't know that, I think I am of the opinion that linking a benefit to inflation, like Social Security is something that linking the annuity to inflation is something that should be done. Do we want to phrase it in that way, or do we want to leave the opening for none?
I think that the principle should be that the benefit be protected against inflation. And
The annuity be protected against inflation.
yeah, and if we're going to include that, then it has to be paid for in advance.
Yep, I'm okay with that. This is neither here nor there. But another thing, another inflation protection element that gets back to helping all people save for a secure retirement. Wisconsin has inflation protection while you're working. So if you're working for the state as a teacher, let's say you put 20 years in, but then you move to Illinois or you do something else, often you get really dinged because you go to work somewhere else, but your benefit in that state is based on your salary when you left. They have inflation protection on that final average salary amount. So you don't get any pay increases from then on out, but they pay the benefit based on the worth of your salary at the time you actually retire.
So it grows incrementally.
Yep, and it creates a more smooth curve. So you actually, that's a big source of loss for people where they just get dinged really hard whenever they move states or move systems. And so it protects that final average salary under those systems. So I think that is something useful. I don't know that we should build it into the principles, but I think generally inflation protection is really important. I don't know. Like I said, that's neither here nor there.
No, it is an interesting element of retirement plan design, though. Do we wish to say anything on plan governance and administration? I might suggest that we consider language that retirement plans benefit from an economy of scale, and that by pooling assets and by pooling liabilities and combining plan participants, just as in an insurance risk pool, retirement benefits also can benefit through reduced costs and reduced volatility.
Yeah, it's a mouthful. I mean, I would be open for something like should be managed in a way, how would I put this? I think including something that should be managed in a way that is sustainable in the long term and that minimizes cost.
Should be managed in a way that what?
Well, I'm trying to look here at some wording that I've got on other things.
Can we not say should be managed in a way that takes advantage of economies of scale and minimizes costs?
I don't know about the economies of scale thing. That just seems ancillary to me, given that we've got all kinds of nods previously to economies of scale.
Okay, how about that in a way that minimizes costs?
Minimizes cost. The only other concepts that I could think of are something about inclusion of stakeholders and long-term sustainability, but I don't know. You could also include transparent and accountability, so those words are always good. I mean, I've got language here that says retirement savings plans must have governance structures that ensure key decisions related to investment allocation, benefit design, and choice of actuarial assumptions represent the interests of all stakeholders are made in a transparent and publicly accountable fashion. So that kind of language I would be open to.
Okay. Can you send that to staff, and we'll see if we can work that in.
I think cost, you brought up cost. I think adding in a cost consideration in addition to kind of interest of stakeholders and transparency and accountable, I think including the cost element would be good too. I'll think about a way to do that.
Okay, let's stop for a moment. And before we begin to look at this in its whole, are there members of the public that wish to comment on what we discussed recently? Please come to the podium. Be sure to introduce yourself.
Is that going to be a running joke from?
There's plenty of running. David Stacy, Midland Farms Relief and Retirement Fund. I'm going to digress a little bit to your previous stop, kind of regarding the benefit eligibility, age, years, service, and vesting. And part of this is because of subsequent discussion. I think Mr. Brainerd made a comment about we've become a too permissive society. It's not all about me. It's not all about you. And when looking in good plan governance and good plan design, this isn't a savings account. It's not a 401k account. Let me frame this in the context of a defined benefit, pooled defined benefit plan. There are other plan designs that do allow for a savings account, cash balance plans of some sort. It has to be generally in government service, has to be annuitized over a period of time. But in a pure defined benefit plan, I think it's completely appropriate for there to be some degree of vesting that encourages someone to work for some period of time, and that there are penalties for not working to that period of time. And that's just the price you pay for not working that period of time in that type of design. That's my opinion. Certainly there may be other opinions, but I think that is fundamental in the success of defined benefit plans, is that they require the employee group to work for at a minimum defined period of time, and we just don't give away everything, all of the employee and employer contributions and plus whatever interest was if they go away. There is a certain degree of, there is quite a bit of benefit to having a plan design that encourages people to stay with a particular employer or employer system. And it's not all about, when I say it's not all about me, it's not all about portability either. There are costs of doing business, and one of the costs of doing business, of providing and administering an effective, efficient, defined benefit plan, is that you have to stick with that plan. And it is a fundamental structural successful design of that plan. It is the failure to comply with that and the failure to understand that is fundamental to the movement toward plans that are more defined contribution in nature. And so I think it's appropriate, to the extent that maybe the PRB doesn't want to say prescriptively that you need to have a defined benefit plan. But if you do have a defined benefit plan, a key element in that defined benefit plan, it's appropriate to say you have a vesting period, that you work for some period of time and you get something out of it past this point of time, but you don't get squat or get very little if you don't work to that point of time. Let's see, secondary related to disability and the death benefits spoken of earlier. Because even in the private sector, there's a presumption that everybody gets Social Security, and so there's a death benefit and a disability benefit tied to Social Security. I listened to a fellow that was knowledgeable in Social Security speak the other day at a conference. They made the claim that 1 in 4, the biggest benefit to a Social Security participant was the disability benefit. And that 1 in 4, he made this claim, 1 in 4 people in the audience would apply somewhere in their life, in their working career, for a disability benefit. That seemed awful high to me. This guy presumably knew what he's talking about. I had no reason to discredit him. In the public sector, there's a number of employees that do not participate in Social Security. And therefore, I think it's reasonable to include some consideration, definitive consideration, in PRB principle of plan design that includes some mention of disability and death benefit, because so many plans, public sector plans in Texas, don't participate in Social Security. So they don't have that Social Security benefit option out there. Then let's see, going the and to the taking your money out, extreme hardship. Every life is an extreme hardship. I respectfully disagree that defined benefit plans exist for the sole purpose to provide a retirement benefit. And if, unfortunately, a set of circumstances in your life make it seem like your life would be easier if you would capitalize on that benefit now instead of wait till later, well, that's too damn bad. That's life. And I think that's inappropriate to include consideration of that in a retirement system, in a defined benefit retirement system. So it's pretty much there is no such thing as an extreme hardship. Life is extremely hard. And then one possible suggestion on when you were talking about the COLA, consideration should be given to reduce erosion of the value of a retirement benefit or annuity over time. Something to that effect. I mean, that's the goal is to prevent erosion of the value of that benefit, or something to that effect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stacy. Anyone else care to speak?
And I may have misunderstood. Lois Emerson with CPS Energy. On the annuitization, I think at one point somebody said one of the principles should be that it's mandatory that a portion of it be
Correct.
annuitized. Our particular plan has 21 different options on how our retirees can take their payments. Not very often do they take a lump sum, but we do have the terminally ill, retiree that's like, I'm going to take all my money right now because I'm not going to make it much longer. And they may not have a family that they're going to pass that retirement benefit on to. So I think leaving an option like that is viable in some cases. So that was my only comment.
Thank you.
Thank you. In response to that remark, I would say that is thinking of the retirement benefit as a cash savings plan, which it is not. It's intended to promote security in retirement.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know if I agree that we want to provide retirement security, but at some level we're taking money out of people's paychecks and setting it aside. It's their money. I think we have to acknowledge that. I think that there are lots of strong distinctions being thrown about here about, defined benefit or retirement plan versus savings. These concepts are the same, and I don't know that we can make those strong distinctions. I think we can talk about how best to use that. And so, to Mr. Stacy's earlier point, that's their money that's in there. We should strongly encourage them not to go get it. But at the end of the day, it's their money. It's savings that was put aside by them for them, and at least the employee contribution of that, certainly. And so I just don't know that we should make quite that strong a distinction there.
Well, that's their money that has been put into a plan that was set up for the purpose of ensuring income security in retirement. It wasn't set up for something else. It was set up to ensure that people who have worked for the public will have a roof over their heads and food on the table as long as they live. Secondarily, if they want the money to pass on to their children, to buy a big red truck, etc., that's to me is a separate issue.
Yeah, I actually don't think we're that far apart. I think that you should have some mandatory annuitization. for lifetime income. I think that lump sum should be available, acknowledging that this was money paid in. There should be some flexibility around how they use the money. I especially given that one of our principles here is this is mandatory. I mean, we're forcing people to save for retirement, and then we're forcing people to annuitize a portion of it to make sure that they don't outlive their money. I think we can provide them some flexibility on a portion of that. And so I'm just saying, like, there's no, like, hard and fast line on this.
No, I agree with that, and I'm sympathetic to that. I think that we probably would agree that a certain amount of paternalism is inevitable in all of this. That left to their own devices, most people make poor choices when it comes to planning financially for retirement, and that's one of the reasons that these plans are in place to begin with.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That's why we're talking about pooled, professionally managed. That's why we're talking about defaults. I like it.
Anyone else want to comment? Please. Welcome. Please introduce yourself.
I'm Jen Jones with ERS. I just had an additional comment I think might be helpful on the benefit levels discussion around income replacement and possibly contributions, and that relates to supplemental savings. A lot of the comments that y'all have made today seem to be around whatever the employer's primary plan is, but most of the systems that are under your purview or the employers attached to those systems offer supplemental savings. And then many of our members also do IRAs or other types of taxable saving. So I wondered if it might be appropriate to at least acknowledge that there would be supplemental savings on the part of the member. I'm not saying that you suggest a certain level. People's careers are not a straight line. So what they do over the course of their career is going to change. But I think that some acknowledgement that there is also this supplemental savings piece.
Can I ask one question? So some of those supplemental savings plans are employer-sponsored.
Yes.
And some are not, like your IRAs.
Yes, and some
Okay.
people just use taxable vehicles as
Yeah,
well.
do you think we should, so some of these principles that we're talking about, we could apply to those supplemental savings vehicles too. So I would say even supplemental savings vehicles, if an employer is going to set up a supplemental savings vehicle, it should only offer pooled, professionally managed, low-fee investments. So like those types of things could apply to supplemental savings plans too. Do you think that is important to acknowledge, or?
I just think it would be helpful to acknowledge that. I'm more concerned about acknowledging the fact that because even people who stay in long-term public service jobs, like a teacher, as I think one of you pointed out earlier, they may change districts, they may change cities or states and be under a completely different system. So that ultimate income replacement rate might vary depending upon those sets of choices. And so hopefully an employee is in a position and is doing some supplemental savings to sort of manage the hedge about, well, what's going to happen to my career over the long term? Am I going to end up potentially disabled or out of work for a period of my career? You know, to say an employee is going to be able to save 20% of their payroll consistently over the course of their career is perhaps not realistic given the life and career phases we go through. And so I just think some acknowledgement that there is this element of supplemental savings, whether it's employer sponsored or if it's something that someone's choosing to do on their own. I just think it would be helpful to acknowledge that, since this is a broader discussion about retirement plan design, but a lot of our comments from PRB are really focused on the primary plans.
Thank you. That's a good point.
Thank you very much. I agree with the comment, and I think we should include a reference to supplemental.
Just
savings. Encouraging employers to sponsor supplemental savings plans.
Yeah, I could get on board with that.
And, you know, I would point out that she's from the ERS, which has got auto-enrollment in the supplemental savings plan,
Yeah.
which I think is an excellent plan design. Welcome. Please introduce yourself.
I'm Dan Waddles with TMRS. Just a couple observations and one suggestion. Started out saying about the variability that we have in plans in Texas. I mean, we have 93 different plans. They all vary to some degree. You're all familiar with TMRS, and we have inhibitors in our plan to keep people from withdrawing their money out. I mean, they can't get access to the match until they retire, so they know that at the end of the day they're going to be able to supplement what they've deposited with the match, and it gets annuitized. So I'm agree with Jennifer that I think it's not a worthwhile adventure to go down the road of confusing the retirement plan with like a savings plan, even in a cash balance plan like TMRS is. And because we have such variability, to get too prescriptive with your guidelines may be not a worthy endeavor in certain areas.
Can I ask one question
Yes.
on that point? I think where we landed on that was essentially we want to discourage people from having, I don't know what our language was, discourage them from taking money out of the retirement plan, or strongly discourage, or something like that. So our language would be good plans should make sure that it's really hard or there are stiff penalties for taking out your money. I don't know. I mean, from my point of view, I don't know that we want to say that nobody should ever take any money out of the retirement plan, even their own contributions. But that's where I think we were going. Is that along the lines?
Well, I don't subscribe personally. I don't subscribe to the fact of allowing access to retirement funds before they retire. I mean, it is a retirement plan. Now, defined contribution plan started out as something different, as a supplemental plan for executives, and now has become a primary retirement vehicle. So, I mean, you're kind of trying to fit a different model into a retirement plan box.
I don't think that's accurate. So I'm not trying to fit it into a different box. I'm acknowledging that we're forcing people to put their own paycheck aside into a savings vehicle. You can say it's a retirement plan. It's totally for retirement. And I'm saying that I am not comfortable putting a total lockbox on that. I understand that we should really discourage people from getting there, but we should not make it impossible for people to get, as your own plan has, the ability to get there if they really, really have to. Now, taking loans for houses and all that stuff should be severely discouraged and should probably be outside the bounds of what is allowable. So we could even be stronger on that if we wanted to get into specifics, we can go stronger. But
I think just distinguishing between when you have a defined benefit plan, which really is more designed towards providing a benefit at the end of the day. I mean, that's what they were designed for. And a cash balance plan is a defined benefit plan. So the other, you mentioned vesting too. We have a 5 or 10 year vesting in our plan too, but there should be some vesting because we have a number of members that come in, employees that come in at cities, and then they leave before 5 years, and you never see them again. So there's a huge number of people that we enroll that never stick around for vesting. If you don't have a minimum vesting term, or you just allow them to vest right away, it creates a larger amount of work to keep track of them. I would also ask, too, I would presume PRB's been very good at this, allowing stakeholders to comment on whatever draft is put together to get some input on that, and we'd suggest you'd probably do that. Probably get some good comments.
That's an excellent idea, and we'll plan to do that. When we come up with a draft set of principles, we'll plan to distribute that for public comment. Is there anyone else that wishes to comment on what we've done so far? You have to get up.
as Mr. Stacy would say, that's the price of doing business.
Sorry, I'll be really brief. I think also that we should also recognize that the Pension Review Board has what you call programs that interface with other defined benefit plans within the state. And I don't know if you're already taking that into consideration. There may be employees who spend their entire career with the state of Texas or within the state of Texas in different defined benefit plans, but there is a such thing as a proportionate retirement. So perhaps consider that portability as well. It's not very portable. I mean, it's recognized that those systems, even though they're not the same, they can merge their service and it can be considered as one.
So you're saying that we should might consider including reciprocity
Yes.
between systems in Texas?
Yes.
Thank you. That's an excellent suggestion.
Mm-hmm.
We might refer to it as transferability as well.
It's a dramatic improvement.
Anyone else? Please.
Going to the whole idea of these principles, what is the ultimate intention for them to be used? I know you're going to develop these guidelines, and then if you go through and you start looking at all the different plans, you say, oh, this plan doesn't have this, but is it going to end up being some kind of a scorecard like the other things or
Yeah.
not? That's just what is the ultimate goal here?
Well, from my perspective, it's in no way intended to serve as sort of as a checklist against existing plans, but rather to provide guidance to plan sponsors, the state, cities, and so on, with regard to what a retirement benefit should look like for employees of state and local government.
And I think you'll notice that we are veering pretty heavily away from being prescriptive. And so even if you wanted to score something on these principles, it would be impossible. So this is very much just kind of guidance on how to think about these various issues for plan sponsors and for policymakers and for the plans themselves.
Okay. I was just started thinking about that. Like, what exactly are we going to do with this? Okay, thank you.
We've gone over all of this in a public meeting, and I'd rather not go all over it again right now. What I'd like to suggest is that I share my notes with the staff, and I know the staff is keeping notes, and ask other members, to the extent that you took any notes, to share your notes with them. And we give staff an opportunity to combine all of this and share with the group their understanding and interpretation of what we've reached consensus on here. And we'll try to reach consensus on this document, and then go from there. We'll probably have to come back and hash it through a little bit more. What are your thoughts, Josh?
I'm totally fine with that. I'm totally fine with that. What are we aiming at here in terms of timeline? Are we thinking that we would try to get a draft ready by the November board meeting to share and then approve kind of dissemination for public and stakeholder comments? What do we?
The November board meeting might be ambitious. I guess it depends on how our draft goes. It's possible we could reach a consensus of what we've talked about here in writing, and if we could, I guess the November board meeting is possible. I also don't see a reason to rush this, and I want to get this good and right.
Got it. I mean, I think that I don't disagree with that at all. I think we're talking about getting this out for public comment. I think that if we can get to a place where we've got a good, solid draft of this, we can bring the rest of the board in and approve for public comment, with the acknowledgement that the working group will then take that public comment, refine, and maybe there's another iteration of public comment. I don't know what that looks like, but just saying here's kind of our initial step. I bet we can get there.
Okay.
But I'm ambitious.
Anything else? Anu? Anything else we have to do right now?
No, I think we're good. And as we mentioned, we were recording the meeting, so we can always go back and listen to the discussion if you're unsure about something, or reach out to the members to clarify if we have questions. We'll start working on the draft language as was discussed among the members today, incorporating, of course, the suggestions that were provided by our constituents. And we will try to shoot for the November board meeting to come up with a draft. And we are talking about approximately a month from today. If not, members could also consider having another meeting in December to look at the draft and then present the draft to the board at the next meeting, or solicit public input first on the draft before going to the full board?
Yeah, it might be useful for you to provide advice on kind of whether I had in my mind that we would bring the rest of the board in before soliciting public comment, just to make sure that we didn't say anything that they weren't in agreement with. But
Yeah, I agree with that process, though, so that this group can reach a consensus and then give it to the full PRB, reach consensus on that, and then send it out to the public for possible revision.
yeah, I'd hate to get too far out ahead of the board on something.
Good point. If there's no other business, then I would consider a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here.